Yeah, so Matt Wood write a blog called Ruralise, currently an architect with Lucas Hickman Smith out in London. Yeah, let's go. So over the past 50 or 60 years, planning policy in the UK has made it very hard to build anything in the countryside. And as a result, it seems to me that we might have lost our ability to do this well if we ever really had it. Most of what's been built in the countryside in that period is unimaginative and unsympathetic to its context. Recent government policy, such as the community right to build, is intended to make small developments in the countryside more easy to carry out. And if we are really going to build more in the countryside, then surely we should be building better. The blog Ruralise I've been using to just think about how that might be done from my own point of view, and the presentation here is really to give a bit of an overview of what Ruralise is about. A recurring theme in the blog is that of special and normal buildings. This seminal diagram from Leon Creer emphasises that both are important and that each actually needs the other. But as a profession, as perhaps we've heard this evening, I think we're often overly interested in the special, sometimes at the expense of the normal and everyday. There's quite a lot on the blog about local distinctiveness, whatever that means, and fitting in. It seems to me that where a building forms part of a valued landscape or streetscape, then that approach is quite reasonable. But certainly for larger developments, urban extensions, new settlements, does it really make sense to benchmark that or refer to a nearby medieval town centre? As I started writing on Ruralise, I identified 4 archetypes or themes that might help me to start thinking about designing in the countryside, Norfolk's architectural DNA, if you like. These were villages, farmsteads, the wide-fronted house, roofs across fields, and you'll hear more about that as I talk. If there is such a thing as a prototypical Norfolk house, then this might be it. It's wide-fronted, 1 room deep originally, so for plenty of daylight and sunlight. This one's timber framed, but was refaced at some point in brick, and it's been extended heavily at the back over the years, so the big roof has got even bigger. This is another Norfolk house which shows some of the typical building materials of the region, the characteristic soft red brick and clay pan tiles. Some areas are flint, but not as much as you think. Colour wash render is missing from this slide, but it's very common. And what I really like about this side, if you look carefully at the gable, you'll see the original line of the roof was much steeper. It was probably thatched. The most consistently most read post on the blog is actually called Thatch Fest. Has some great examples of ultra-modern use of a very traditional material. 2 examples from the Netherlands at the top, and Catherine Finley's pool house at the bottom. She calls this collision of old and new, kind of future rustic approach. House builders, of course, like to use traditional or regional materials to make their developments more locally distinctive, in inverted commas. But in one place, I queried the use of weatherboarding on this development in London. In fact, there's very little weatherboarding in this bit of Norfolk, apart from a few black barns and a handful of white water mills. House builders, of course, have a particular take on the village aesthetic, woodly roads and fake old buildings, which is, of course, nothing like a real Norfolk village. But this is the normal stuff that we have to engage and improve upon if we're to make building in the countryside better, if we get the chance, that is. Another group of houses in Walberswick this time, quite normal as the last houses were, but somehow there's something much more Norfolkish about these. The black weatherboarding in this part of the world is more appropriate, and again, I really like the way the big roofs swoop down towards the entrances. Some very simple but effective landscaping really works to bind this site together, hedges and birch trees. In some respects, along a similar scheme, probably from about a similar time, early 80s, I think, by Pat Bellet in Needham Market. I noticed these big roofs across fields from the train originally and detoured to investigate. The houses are actually laid out around 3 courtyards in L shapes, and that connects, this has gone I think, to another of my themes, that of the farmstead. The Norfolk Residential Design Guide suggests how a rather literal version of a farmstead might be used to add density and variety into a residential layout. And on the other side of the slide, you can see how Atelier Pro proposed a series of super scaled up farmsteads in their work for Landpro on the Norwich Research Park rather. More big roofs. This is McCrane and Lavington at Langerak, again in the Netherlands. And there is something farmsteadish about it, about this project. But you'll notice, quite interesting, the layout is entirely driven by a whole series of narrow-fronted units being lined up, so their living rooms face south towards the sun. As early as 1919, the Tudor Waters Committee was extolling the virtues of a wide-fronted unit with a free living room as a way of getting daylight into living spaces no matter what the orientation. And working in Norfolk in the 1950s, Taylor and Green made extensive use of the wide-fronted house because of these advantages of sunlight and daylight. There's a fair bit on Royal Eyes about Taylor and Green. I really buy their work, partly for their enjoyment of the domestic, and partly for their unfashionable interest in traditional materials and decoration. But most of all, I admire them because they committed to working in Norfolk and produced a body of work that was truly regionally distinctive. I've also written about the work of Dulcas and rural design, two practices that have committed to their bit of the UK in the same way, the Isle of Skye in their case. Dulcas have written in detail about how they've drawn inspiration from the local vernacular. Rural design started in a similar mode, but something about their more recent projects suggests to me that they're getting a bit bored of designing normal buildings. I've written one post about architects who bring a special building mentality to the design of normal buildings, particularly houses. I think there has been a shift in interest towards a more understated approach, and I think we need to think of re-engaging housing, not trying to reinvent it. So I'm going to give almost the last word to a very normal little house. I don't know who designed it. Again, a big roof caught my attention, and I rather like the sort of abstract blank wall above the ground floor windows. There's no mistaking that this is a modern house. It's definitely not a fake old house, but it couldn't be more Norfolk if it tried. So, in conclusion, I said this was Rural Eyes work in progress. There's been a lot of ideas. There's a lot of ideas on the blog, so I hope it made some sort of sense. Not least because at Lucas Hickman Smith, we've just been instructed on a site in South Norfolk that should really serve as a good testing bed for all these ideas. So maybe in a couple of years' time at the festival in 2013, I can come back and tell you what sense I made of it all anyway. Thanks very much.